When I first got off the bus, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know a lot about Africa or how the people would react to us. But once I first got off, I just looked around and got the biggest smile on my face, and I knew then this was the place for me. It would be my new home. One of the guards at the hotel, actually, he told me that he would work from 6 at night to 6 in the morning, so that's 12 hours, and that he would only make, and he'd work 5 days a week, 6 days a week, but he'd only make about $6 a week. There was a girl named Alice, and she was really, really kind to us. She didn't have a whole lot, but she gave us what she had. She gave us the corn that she had when she probably should have had it for herself and her family. And she would help teach me how to make the chai tea and the chapati bread, and she was very nice to me. And a lot of the kids influenced me because I could teach them and they were teaching me too. And one particular kid named Kevin, he was like my main guy that I go to, and he kind of helped translate for me. He would tell me what other people were trying to tell me, and he taught me a lot about the land and what Kawira, the village, was like. There was one guy, he was about 23, and his name was Paul. And Paul, he wants to be a pastor in Kenya, because he said a lot of the churches are becoming corrupt and more concerned about money. So he said he wanted to come to America to be a taxi driver. And he asked me, he's like, is that a good job? And I was like, why not? But he told me he had saved up a lot of money to come here, and he's really feeling called to do that in his life. The water, when we went to the village, the women are the ones who mostly get the water, and they go down a hill, probably 2 miles down a hill, and it was really steep, and I could barely walk down there. And once we got down there, we saw it was just a couple feet, a couple yards of dirty brown water. It looked like, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it looked like the river, the chocolate river. That was the same as their water looked. And they would use this for their animals and to wash their clothes and wash for bathing and for drinking and their crops, and they'd use it for everything, and they didn't have a lot. And we went in the rainy season, so when the summertime would come around, that's when, there would be no water for them at all. But they'd put them in these jugs. I'm not sure how much they weighed, probably about 50 to 70 pounds. And they would tie them around their heads, and they'd get up and they'd walk all the way up this steep 2-mile hill. And a lot of people had broken their necks doing this, and people died carrying this water up there. We delivered 2,000 pounds of supplies that included t-shirts, blankets, toys for the kids, food and medicine, and those types of things that meet the physical needs. We also help build a school floor, because often while the kids are learning in school, these things called jiggers are about bugs, they're really little, and they'll get in your feet while they're sitting there learning. And when the kids go to sleep at night, they crawl out and they eat away at the feet, causing ulcers and holes in their feet, making it almost impossible to walk on. We also, while we were there, a well digging company came by and dug a borehole, and while we were there they got water, and that was incredible to see. They broke out singing and praising Jesus. But probably the most important thing we did was just to build relationships with the people. It really showed them, we're out there, don't give up, God loves you, and we're here for you. So there was a boy in the village, and his name was Nick, and he was probably about 8 years old, but he was in a class with about 5 to 6 year olds. I thought he was a smart kid, and I really enjoyed talking to him, and so he really stuck out of the crowd. But he told me when he was little, he got burned in a house fire. His hut caught on fire, and his whole family got out except for him. And if you looked at his hands were very wrinkly and they were very burnt. He had to wear a cap over his head because his head would get burned often, and from the sun. And it had to be third-degree burns. It was very bad, but he didn't let it bother him. He kept playing with the other kids, and he kept loving Jesus. A lot of the young boys would follow me around, and it was really funny. I was kind of nervous at first. I didn't know what to tell them. I was running out of things to tell them. But it was funny because they would tell me stuff instead of me having to tell them stuff. They would teach me the language, and they teach me about soccer because they love to play soccer. And one thing I definitely remember, I would tell them every day, Ningoka, which means I'm coming back. And I'd say Ningoka Losio, which means I'm coming back tomorrow. But on the very last day at the village, I couldn't tell them Ningoka Losio, but I did tell them Ningoka Ringi, which means I'm coming back again. I remember because some of the kids were too young to realize that we were just gonna leave, but there was definitely kids who knew and they didn't want to show it, so they really were just trying to not really talk to us, kind of held back. And right before we were going to leave, this little girl got on the bus from the village, and she ran up to, I think it was Amy, who was with us, and she just gave her the biggest hug. And right then, everybody around us just started crying. It was right when everybody started crying that I realized that we were actually really leaving, and that I wouldn't see them for a while, and that was probably the worst part of the trip. We went to one of the churches one day, and we had just got out of church, and a whole bunch of kids were around me. And I was like, what is something that I can tell them or show them that'll stick in their mind, that makes it, instead of me handing things down to them and looking down to them, that makes us equal. And I realized I could teach them the Bernie. So I started doing the Bernie, and one kid started doing it, another kid started doing it, then they all started doing it. And instead of it was this big funny thing, but I feel like deep inside we realized that me and this child, like, we were the same. Like, I wasn't any better than him, and he wasn't any better than me. And it really brought us to like an eye-to-eye level. Before I left on the trip, I was really having a tough year. It was my first year in high school, and I was hanging out, with the wrong crowd, not necessarily doing the right things, But I got to a really low, lonely place, and I just asked God. I was like, "Dear God, can you please, show me some love?" But so once I went on the trip and I came back, I realized, I was like, wow, I really saw love there. It was, that was definitely like when I got it, when I understood what God's love meant and what Jesus did for us, really. And it's cool because you could actually see God. But the scary thing is you could also see the devil. You could see what the devil was trying to do, and you could see every time God was winning over the devil. Something that I was also excited about on the trip was getting a name. I had heard from people who'd been to Africa before that they were given like a tribal name and it meant something really cool. We were building the school floor, and this random lady comes up to me. She says, "George Kimani," and then she said something in her language, and I was like, I didn't really understand because she had a really thick African accent. I was like, okay, George Kimani. And then I got Kevin to help me, and it turns out she was naming me then. She named me George Kimani. We were actually doing a home visit, and a lady came up to me and said, "Joroge is your name." So, and the way that they name people in Kenya, it switches every generation. So her father was named Joroge, and then it skips, and then I would be considered his grandson. And I met, my adopted brother, and I met the whole family, and it was a wonderful experience. And I think that those names were given to me because they didn't have any real meaning, because they were just tribal names. But for me, they meant a new Ethan, a new guy named Joroge Kimani. People often ask me if I had any regrets about the trip or if there's something I wish I could have done right. And what I tell them is, words cannot describe this trip, and pictures cannot describe this trip. Songs, music, poetry, art, nothing can describe this trip. Even if you could open my brain and show it on a big screen, it could not explain what this trip really meant, because it means different things for every person. And I think that's one of the things God really does that's incredible in our lives, is He has a separate plan for us and shows us each different things.